Welcome everyone into Garden of Thought, and one of my favorite guests. This is a coup de grace. That's an inside pun for those who know, but even my guest doesn't know what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about someone that I'm not supposed to be talking about right now in very roundabout ways. But my guest is Professor Jon F. White from the great Crecganford channel on YouTube, amongst many other things that he is. And whilst he is an extraordinary man of extraordinary accomplishments, he's one of his claims to shame is that he's now been on the show probably 8 times, and hopefully will be again. Professor, how are you?
How do you do, young Jeff? I am tickety-boo. Thank you.
That's fantastic. And I love that he calls me young Jeff because we are months apart. So old John and young Jeff together, we meet in the middle like Benjamin Button. It's perfect. So
John's good, but yeah, that's
right.
Just John is fine.
You know, I like to start with the Bill O'Reilly formality and then drop into the John, so I can, you know, we're on this new platform. We're proudly presented by the Sports Jedi Network, and you know, also on the regular Garden of Thought and at Garden of Thought Pod on YouTube, and you know, and still on the Wrestling Soup Network and all and every place else. But there's a whole new world of listeners and potential listeners because Sports Jedi is on YouTube and Kick and Instagram and this, that, and the other things I haven't even heard of. No surprise there. Mm-hmm. So I need to tell them who you are and what Crecganford. So you're a professor and have been for many years. As I understand it, you are formally retiring shortly from professorship, but still continuing in your works because you have a project which I'm not going to talk about. You'll tell the world what it is, but because you're probably a humble man of sorts, I would say that you are, if not you're in the conversation as one of the foremost experts on Indo European folklore and mythology. I know that you've changed it to folklore, not just mythology, in the world. And for those of you who are new to the channel or new to the show, you probably don't really know what Indo European is. And it's a bit tricky because it's a linguistic group. So it is peoples, but it's not like tribes of the same type of people. In fact, it's very different types of peoples, and we may have relations with peoples genetically or culturally that are not Indo-European. For instance, I'm Jewish, of course, of European descent, which is Indo-European, but Israeli Sephardic Jews, their language is not. It is a Semitic language. I think Afro-Asiatic is the overarching term. So linguistically, you know, Hebrew should be closer to me. It's not. I barely speak a word. But English is an Indo-European from Germanic, but also an Indo-European is India and Persian, and you know, and lots of the languages in between, and most of the languages we know. So it's a linguistic group with things that are kind of culturally shared through the language and not necessarily through other things where it can be as different can be, at least as different as people can be in the human race. John, please correct or make that a better definition.
I don't know where to start. So, so I'm not a professor. I'm retired, independent academic now. I am best known for the YouTube channel Crecganford and for the work on the folklore database. And I spend my time whizzing around the world talking about myths, really, if I'm not on YouTube. So in my retirement, through people like yourself who support me, I try to give people access to some of the academia I've acquired in my life, and passing it on in ways that are easily digestible, because as you've just proved, it can be quite complicated to explain some of these things. Yes, certainly terms like Indo-European. So that the Indo-European language group, because everybody speaks the same language, they tend to have cultural stories that are very similar, because it is our assumption that they originated in a central place and then spread out and took those stories with them. So everybody has some stories that are similar, and I specialize in understanding those stories, particularly the cosmological ones, but my knowledge, I'd like to think, is somewhat broader and a little bit deeper than that. So happy to talk about any of those things, because I think You want to talk about the Indo Europeans today and some of the gods?
I do. Yeah, and I would agree that your knowledge base is deeper than just that, and I sure hope it is, of course, and I sure do. Your students probably for the last 3 decades or so hope that as well. But all of the universities that subscribe to your database and all of the thousands of scholars that use it also stand in testament to that. So, so here's one of the areas of confusion, which is not really our topic of the day, but I am constantly asking you sort of about biblical ties to Indo-European things, and your answer to me is, first of all, you always answer. He's always answering. I'm not saying that you should all bother him, but if you're a Patreon, he certainly will. And if you're a Patreon, then test it, I guess, but be smart. And your first line of response is always, I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm a student of Indo-European, and the Bible was not written, largely might have been written in Greek, which is an Indo-European language, but it was Near Eastern and Semitic tales. Although there's certainly overlap with Babylonian stuff, but there's also overlap with Egyptian stuff, and there's relations to Greek things, including Greek words, which may or may not have been original influences or just a result of the translations. And I think scholars can debate those things eternally. But we're not going to get into that today. But it is a segue, because one of the things, and I promise you, world, I've been bugging him about this for months, and he can nod about it, because I've been asking him if the Old Testament, or specifically sort of the out of Egypt Exodus part of it, going up into the conquest of Israel, was sort of the Jewish version of the Odyssey. And he's like, I don't know. I haven't really looked at that. I don't know. I'd have to look into it, but I have no idea when I have time to look into that. And the Odyssey, of course, is a gigantic movie right now. No spoilers, because you can't spoil something that was written somewhere between 2600 and 2800 BCE, and was oral tradition for likely centuries before that, and likely changed and morphed in hundreds of different ways, like all myths, and was just Homer's version of it. And there's also wide belief that there wasn't a Homer, that Homer's almost like Pope, that they just pick the name, and lots of different authors.
It means collection, I think, Homer, or a group, or so a collation of things. So it's because that's Homer what it is, a collection of stories, really. But to be left in an epic is not unique, because it's very similar in some ways to the Mahabharata, the Iranian and Indian epic. Which is a bit strange, while these epics lurking around in Indo-European. But yes, the story itself is, there is probably an older story, and parts of it have been replaced through time to keep it relevant. So for the Greeks, the Trojan War, which was almost certainly a real event, that was whacked into this epic, but I'd imagine 1200 BCE, the story existed, but it didn't have the Trojan War. It had something else in it, which people don't look at. But
yeah. And it's interesting, because one of the themes about the Odyssey, which has been made more apparent to me as I get older, and when I read it and hear about it, I understand more things. And not by coincidence, I recently listened to the great courses on the Old Testament and also the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now I'm working my way through the New Testament great courses. But the Old Testament, one of the things about it, and in the Odyssey, which seems to be thematically consistent, is that the rules of hospitality are probably more important than anything else, as it seems, including like your wife and kids and things like that. So violations of the rule of hospitality cause terrible tumult. Again, I promise you we're not going to get too much into the Bible today. We'll do that when and if you're ready. But the tie-in is that Greek mythology is in fact Indo European mythology, and it's probably the best known mythology, at least worldwide. And that brings us to what was the titular topic of the day, which is sort of the prototypical pantheon of polytheistic deities in the Indo-European world. Maybe archetypes is the proper word. I don't know exactly, but if you could run us through that, that'd be great, and then we can circle around and have a little fun with the Odyssey.
So we'll stop and reverse quite a lot.
Right.
Okay. So whilst Greek is an Indo-European language, okay, it is not necessarily full of Indo-European culture. Okay, so for example, the Greek creation myth is absolutely a Near Eastern creation myth, which you'd find in the Enuma Elish, which you'd also find at the start of the Bible. So there is significant influence from the agricultural, I call them cultures, in the Near East into Greece. And what's probably happened is that they arrived in Greece, settled in there, and then the Indo-Europeans came along and didn't quite remove that culture that had embedded itself in the region. And that's why their pantheon, funny enough, Greek pantheon does not look Indo-European at all, really. But I would say we can talk about that. But, yes, but the rest of what we do find is around the Pontic Caspian steppe near the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, between there, just above the Caucasus Mountains, there's a region, and it seems we're reasonably confident there that the Proto-Indo-European language was formed, and therefore all the languages that come from that source seeded out and dispersed out, and along with some of these stories and some of the beliefs in gods. So we see a consistent, or not, we see patterns in pantheons that have emerged from there in a number of countries that you would consider, or languages that are Indo-European. And so Greek is an Indo-European language, but it does have some gods that you can say are influenced, their names are influenced from the Indo-European, but they aren't necessarily Indo-European themselves. So the way to look at this is, if you look at a pantheon, that you have functional correspondence. So you have gods that do the same thing, like thunder gods. You have, and this is for you, Jeff, especially, etymological cognacy. So, because I know you like a bit of cognacy. So,
sure.
So gods that have names that are similar to each other, that are derived from each other, have a link there.
Deus Zeus.
Exactly. Jupiter and Zeus and Tyr, all that, Deus Pita.
Uranus, Uranus. Or Uranus.
Yeah, he's cognate. But the other thing we need to bear in mind is that, so we have these sort of comparisons, but we also have to remember that the Indo-European pantheons aren't a point in time. They lasted over thousands of years across millions of square miles of landscape. So to say a pantheon was this, you have to put a big asterisk next to it and say at a particular point in time when we look at it. And so rather than me make this into an academic paper and do lots of footnotes, I am going to be generalizing for all the people.
It's a podcast. That's fine. And by the way, he does have a channel called Crecganford, which you should subscribe to. And I'm sure over the course of the many years that's been there, that he has explored many of these things in far more detail, and you should check it out. And if you can, you should be a patron, or if you can't, buy a coffee mug. I'm sorry, a tea mug. A tea mug. John's a tea guy, not a coffee guy.
Absolutely, a real drink. So,
yeah, can I ask a couple of questions, which I hope will be okay? So one is probably the obvious one. And it was interesting that the Greek mythology, while influenced by Indo-European, isn't a typical Indo-European pantheon. And I'm going to reverse back to that one in a second. Okay. But it's often said that Roman mythology sort of took over Greek mythology. But I know that's an oversimplification. But did Roman mythology take the Greek mythology of sorts and make it more of a typical Indo-European? or did the non-Indo-European aspects of the Greek mythology sort of non-Indo-Europeanize Roman mythology, which is sort of the last mythology that we know of big time before sort of monotheism, such as it is, rose?
So the Roman mythology, yes, that you see a lot of synchronization or synchronicity with the Greeks. However, as where I started is off saying the Greeks had a Near Eastern creation myth from agricultural alignment. The Romans had Romulus and Remus, which is a Indo-European creation myth. So the Romans were probably more influenced by Indo-Europeans, even though Rome was pretty much founded by the Greeks through the Etruscans and the like, because they were there first, and they had a lot of Greek influence, a lot of trade with Greeks, and that obviously fed through into Rome and persisted. So yes, that's why we see that. But yes, there's a lot of then you have the usual Indo-European motifs pop up in Rome and occasionally Greece, but it's mainly between India, Iran, and the Old Norse that we see probably most connections. So really the extreme areas of the Indo-European landscape.
And as I understand, the Romans were rather flexible with their religion, that you could practice your own religion as long as you also adhere to the Roman Jupiter as the leader of the gods, and or the Romans simply replaced your gods with their names, but everything else, or most everything else, was more or less the same. Now, I don't know how that applied in Italy itself, but is it fair to say broadly that when they Romanized the Hellenic religion, that they made it more Indo-European, or at that point was the ship sailed, we turned into a whole new stew of religion?
The pantheon of the Romans has more similarities with the Indo-European pantheon, okay. the sort of template. So what you're right, the Romans didn't really mind what you did. They looked at this as what I called the functional correspondence. If you've got a thunder god and we've got a thunder god, then yes, we understand your thunder god is the same sort of thunder god as ours. That's how they got that. But you're right, the supreme leader, Jupiter Maximus, or you had to consider, you had to bow down to him if the Romans asked you to.
Okay.
So you see that.
And my other question before, you said when the Greek is not a typical Indo-European religion, it's interesting because I myself, have noticed, that there were a lot of similarities to Egyptian and then like Babylonian, Sumerian, and then as you sort of dig deep into that, you also start noticing differences as well. But is the original Greek mythology maybe more the southern and western parts of the Mediterranean, sort of your Egypt to, I don't know, modern day Iran influence for the Greek mythology?
Syria. Yeah, the Near East. So you have to bear in mind the agricultural revolution, so to speak, which started around 11,000 years ago or so. People ended up in Greece probably around 6,000 years ago. But from that, but the Indo-Europeans didn't turn up till about 5,000 years ago. It was knocking on the door. So the Greeks had a 1,000 years head start with the agricultural world and the views and the gods there. Because for crops you need rain and you need sun. And the weather's more important. Plus you also have to understand that Greece is on the sea, and so there's lots of influence of the sea and sea gods and alike. And there was obviously a fair amount of war going on, so the war gods are slightly different. And so there's many different influences. It isn't just like there's this template of a pantheon. What we see is in the agricultural type pantheons that the thunder god and the earth mother tend to be the mum and dad, so to speak, and then the other gods come down. Where the Proto-Indo-European pantheon, we believe, had the father god of the sky, so daylight, the shining, the day. You could almost call it a sun god, but not quite. And the earth mother and their son was what we'd call the thunder god, the or the god of the oak, or the striker, which is
right.
how
Sun, S-O-N, not S-U-N.
Yes. So they had that sort of setup, which is quite an interesting. A father, mother, and son. You know, it's just like, that's a nice pattern to have a religion from.
Sure, for a lovely nuclear family, literally.
Indeed.
And,
Yes.
and oftentimes the sun, S-O-N god, the thunder god, was also the hero god who had to defeat some other primordial creature, usually
Predominantly in agricultural cultures, yes. So from the Near East, yes. From the Indo European, that quickly turned into a real person. So we see that. So the thunder god is the god the warrior sacrifices to do their great things, and that warrior would be called Trito, or third, because you have we have twins at the beginning of creation, called Manus and Yimo, meaning man and twin, and then this Trito character appears as the warrior man that goes off and do wonderful things, but they would sacrifice to Perkinus, or equivalent to which is a storm god, to get their power. But initially it probably was a storm god, but it quickly changed to be that hero.
And usually they failed once and needed the help of their sister or some other deity.
Depends what they're doing. For raiding cattle, not necessarily, but for other things, the sister came in. So we see a dawn goddess, well attested to in Indo-European religions and cultures, and the dawn goddess was often the story goes that she's kidnapped, and then her brothers, which are then in the form of what we call the divine twins, not to be confused with the primordial twins of creation. These divine twins, who often are on horseback, come and rescue her, and that's that story. That's reasonably well attested to in a number of cultures.
I'm going to stop showing off, and I'm just going to let you start with the prototypical pantheon, which I believe you did with the sort of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother as being your primordial, Mother Earth.
The sacred relationship between the mother and father. Yeah,
and then we got as far as a sun god, S-O-N, that is oftentimes your storm god, though I suppose if you lived on the sea and weren't as dependent on rain for sustenance, maybe it was a different type of hero.
Was different. No, so sun and the moon were attested to differently as heavenly bodies to worship. So that's Hehul and Mednot, sun and moon in Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European. And the storm god, the grown sun, is Perkinos, which is etymologically linked to the striking of an oak tree by lightning. That's what we believe. So oak trees sort of call to light a lot, and that's where we get that thunderer. Now, there's also Husus, which is dawn. Which is the other one, which is the one who's kidnapped, and the divine twins then have to come to rescue her. The divine twins don't seem to have a Proto-Indo-European name, so from the original source language the Indo-Europeans come from, because they're always called different names and unrelated in various pantheons, like you have Castor and Pollux in the Roman, for example.
It's interesting because in the Native American, North American anyway, there are hero twins, and I don't think they have names either. I think they're just called the hero twins.
Well, they have names, but they're just different. They're not a consistent name. So what's interesting about these divine twins is that because they're sometimes associated as, I guess, warriors sometimes, or rescuers, definitely, because they rescued the dawn goddess, their daughter. But actually, analysis of them show that they're not exactly the same. One's always stronger than the other. One is more of a warrior. The other one is more of what we call a provider. And that's interesting if you understand how the Indo-European people saw the world. And they had, you could call it, some people call it a class structure, although it's not quite that, I would say. But we see the world split into a king, into who rules everyone, a priest, warriors, and providers. You have this sort of system. So, and it's considered priests are represented by the head of the the body, the primordial body. The warriors are represented by the torso, and the providers are represented by the legs. And when the universe starts, the twins of creation, one kills the other and creates those people from that body, as well as create the world from the body, which is a different story we can go to at some point. So they create these people, but what we find in the stories of the divine twins is that, say, one tends to be stronger than the other. And what we also see, certainly in the Roman and Indian, to a degree, is that the weaker tends to disappear from the record, from the mythological record at some point. We also see it in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles with Hengist and Horsa, or like a German divine twins, that Hengist is the older brother and Horsa is the younger, and Horsa disappears from the historical record, and Hengist persists, and Castor and Pollux, I think it's Castor that persists as I think he's a patron of the Roman legions, and Pollux disappears. But we see this. So there's obviously there's something going on at the time in those cultures that recognize that these divine twins aren't quite the same. One is stronger than the other. But
you need one. One's an expendable.
Yes, but that isn't actually directly attested to. You have to work that out by reading between the lines.
Okay.
And I'd give a nod to Bruce Lincoln, who did a lot of work about that. Although, if you ask me what book that is in of his, I cannot remember.
I promise not to ask that. Angus, of course, survives today as a class of beef that is considered a very fine cut of meat that Burger King uses. So take from that how fine, in fact, it actually is. But not a shot on Burger King. Just saying, fast food generally isn't your top grade beef.
No, definitely not.
Okay, so if you were going to sacrifice beef to a god, you might sacrifice an Angus cow, but you would not give them whoppers. That would probably be a bad idea. I haven't tried it myself.
It's actually quite interesting, because there are people trying to recreate these old religions. Try to bring them back, try to work out what was going on, and obviously they can't. Let's say in England, it isn't really looked on very good to take a cow to the local stone altar and sacrifice it. People think that's cruel or weird, or something in between. So what you see is that these people who try to recreate this tradition do things like, buy packets of meat and put them on, or a loaf of bread or something. So like a processed modern meal. Which, if you believe it, you believe it. You can't knock it. It just seems a bit odd that I will give a processed product with additives and flavorings or whatever in a plastic packet to a god as a sacrifice. I mean, the idea is right, I guess, but I don't know. If I was a god, would I prefer, a whopper or a packet of chicken, or would I prefer a bit of steak, like raw?
Well, the gods had sort of very human-related functions, and there was no god of butchery, or at least I know of. So maybe there was, but I think they might appreciate that the cuts were already butchered for them. You get a T-bone, you could get a flank, you could get a fillet. I mean,
if you got prop steaks like that, yes, it's sort of an unprocessed form of natural meat I get, but processed meat, I was a bit strange. I was in Norway the other week doing a talk there at a Viking market, and I was talking to them about trying to recreate the religious actions and rituals, and I mentioned this, and they were quite disappointed that people would think that was appropriate. So even within communities who are trying to replicate the same thing, there are differences of opinion on the sacrifice of a Big Mac or a Whopper.
I'm sure there are. I mean, I think I mentioned while we're on air that I've been going through the great courses on various parts of the Bible and various parts of non-Bible but are biblically related. And the things that people argued about then, and probably still do argue about, seem to sort of be missing the point of every religion, and that seems to be the human condition, is that we sort of lose the message. We lose the forest for like every single aspect of the trees, and this might be one of those things. I will say this, that if you're worried about these kinds of things and you're trying to recreate the religion, but you don't want to, kill a cow yourself someplace, and we can have different debates about if slaughterhouses are better or not, but at least they're legal for what that's worth. At least use the EU standard of organic and grass-fed meats, because I don't think the gods in the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, or really anything up until the modern age, were used to steroids and corn and soy and whatever it is that we're feeding these beasts now. And the rules in the United States are shockingly low to be able to call something organic or grass-fed. And that's not a soapbox. It's just, that just happens to be true. And if you care about those things, that should be a big deal. But if you're trying to appease a god, I would think that they would want to eat something that seems more au natural and grass-fed, and that they can handle the parasites that maybe we can't, because of course they're gods and cannot die. I'm not even sure they can kill each other.
Some gods can. Not all gods are immortal.
Oh, that is so sad. Okay, so we got as far as so when you say that Norse mythology is more similar and Indian and Persian, the interesting thing about Norse, as I've been told, is that Odin, the king of the gods, is not the typical Indo European king of the gods. And some people believe, maybe most people who are in scholarly worlds, believe that Odin was a late import to sort of pacify sort of the Druidical cultures that the Indo Europeans were running into, I guess in Celtic, maybe pre-Celtic. I don't know. Is there anything to that? Or like Odin seems to be more associated with Mercury or Hermes than, say, Zeus.
Yeah, now we're getting complicated. Right. Okay. The story of Odin.
When I love when you get that look on your face, that there he goes again. There's
so many things. I've got to remember them all. I'm just worried I will answer your question, but only half of it. So the name Odin is an old name. So no doubt about it. Thousands of years old. So the name's been around. So Woden and Wodenaz, and which naturally cognates to Odin in the Scandinavia. That's been around for ages. So the etymologically cognacy of the word is fantastic. What we're now looking at is functionally, is there some correspondence? What's going on? And the functional correspondence of Odin changes. Okay, so Odin is literally a war god, or that a god of frenzy, very much so. Maybe the god of warriors. Certainly, probably wasn't a chief god in the Proto-Germanic world. So what has happened? Well, my view is that probably on the collapse of the Roman Empire, on the coming home of many mercenaries from the Roman Empire to Scandinavia, because the Roman Empire hired many soldiers and many from Scandinavia. They brought lots of things back, lots of thoughts and culture, and with the wars going on and the like, and the battles, I say, with local tribes, they probably needed a better god, a more intelligent god, and their current chief god wasn't doing it. So the way I see it is that Othor, who is the god of poetry, and very similar in name to Odin, was probably merged with Odin, but that's because poetry was considered sort of magical and knowledgeable, and if you could read and like you had access to extra knowledge. That comes along, and what we also see is that the Indo European creation myth of Manus and Ymo changes. That Ymo persists, but under the Scandinavian or the Old Norse name of Ymir, but Manus disappears. But who does Manus's role in the New World Order? And Manus is considered the first priest, someone of knowledge and sacred power. Odin. Odin, in effect, replaces Manu in the Indo-European cosmology of the Old Norse, and has all this knowledge and power. And we see things in like the Havamal poem, which is sort of the words of the High One. You know, his knowledge that he has power and and magic, and he is considered by many royals, a very important god. Now, whether he was chief god, that I think is open to a little bit of debate, because we only really have the attestations of Christians a few hundred years after he was stopped being worshipped. It may be that he was just a high priest figure, and we just naturally assume, because he's mentioned all the time, that he was the chief god, and perhaps Tyr was still there, or Ullr, or one of the other gods. We can't be 100% sure.
Now, Tyr, not Thor.
Not Thor. Thor also could be considered a sky god rather than just a storm god, and so therefore could potentially have the profile as did Freyr. So we see probably in different regions at different times. So the Old Norse has been around for, let's say, 1,000 years. Let's say from 0 to 1,000 to make it easy to think about. During that time, the pantheon changed, the political pressures changed, the trade changed, when wars happened, and knowledge came along, and things like the knowledge of writing and runes and that were starting to be more common, and that probably almost certainly influenced changes in the pantheon. But what is really interesting about the Old Norse pantheon is that almost all of the gods do not have Indo-European names. So that may suggest that agricultural culture came along, because there are agricultural Near Eastern myths in Old Norse as well. They may have come along, settled in, and the Indo-Europeans come along after and replaced them, and that may explain things like the Aesir and the Vanir war. We see these two groups conflicting. That may be an influence.
Can we pause on that for a second, because that seems to be such a large part of the background mythology of Norse, but nobody seems to know anything about it except that they were at war, they hit a stalemate, and like typically in wars, they sent over some of their gods and goddesses to Asgard. There was a marriage, which I guess is kind of hostage, kind of tribute, sort of alliance, and then we just get into the cycle of starting Ragnarok, having Ragnarok, and starting again in whatever form it would be. But there is no information on the Vanir beyond that, or am I incorrect? And if there isn't, I mean, it seems to me that's fertile ground for somebody to write a fantastic, sword and sorcery, Game of Thrones type of whole world epic. It could be the next big thing. Not me, because I can barely write an email, as you know.
So there isn't any real attestation of that, outside what is written about the war and how the war was resolved. But if we look at it from a mythological point of view rather than theology, which is where I sort of stand on these things, I'm not a classicist or anything like that. I look at myths, what they really are. So the Odyssey isn't a journey, as most people see it. It's a different thing in my mind. But we can always go back to that. But so looking at this story, what we're really seeing is something has happened, and to make sense of it, the answer was the story they put in, which is that there was in effect like a war hostage exchange, and things carried on uncomfortably. but there were different people around. And that could relate to many things. It could be related to changing culture, although I think if I'm honest about it, I don't think it's quite that black and white. It may be more to do with people coming up from Germania and impacting those who are already in Scandinavia, because there's a lot of conflict we see there. The landscape's very different and there's a natural barrier. So, yeah, I mean, it is probably an answer to some conflict that happened, but we have no idea when that story was written. Not really, no. Written over 1,200 years ago. But that's probably all we can say.
So the answer to that, it's sort of the traditional warrior, hunter-gatherer, siege culture versus the more pastoral culture. That's just an oversimplification.
Would oversimplify it to that. Yeah, but it could just be two Indo European tribes coming together, because we see none of the gods having Indo European names. It could be that the Indo Europeans we have there had a fight with another lot of Indo Europeans. We say some from the north, some from Scandinavia, some from Germania, and that could be a result of that. We just do not know. I mean, we'd like to think it's something more exotic than that.
So it's not your island's fault. It's not like a Merlin figure sort of merged into it, and then I mean, you can't rule it out, but that's not likely.
Yeah, exactly. So so we just don't know, and that's the problem with all these. Why we see patterns, and it's what I do. I mean, part of my job as a comparative mythologist is to try and find these patterns, and the YouTube side of my work is to speculate, because that's people find that interesting, but to remain honest, as opposed to my academic work, which is really miserable and makes everybody disappointed, because I can't say these things are thousands of years old and whatever they are. There's a balance there. There's two sides to me, sort of thing.
Most religions have an eschatology, an end of time, some sort of. Probably all, but I certainly don't know all of anything. But it's interesting that at some point they seem to all have a passing the torch from sort of primordial gods to more active gods to your semi-divine, divine on earth, semi-divine age of heroes. And that's what a lot of people say the Odyssey is. It's sort of the end of the age of heroes, where the gods, in the Iliad, the gods were right there next to men. In the Odyssey, a little bit less so, but still there. And then the heroes basically die out, and the heroes are not like superheroes. The heroes are, have god blood in them. And maybe but you also see that, the pharaohs were supposed to be from divine. And I often wonder if monotheism didn't take over, what was supposed to be next? Was Apollo going to take over as king of the gods? Was Athena, who seemed to be Zeus's favorite, or would they just exist forever in this state where Zeus is much stronger than the rest of them, and every now and then maybe elevates a Hercules to the 12 or whatever the situation is?
So there's two things going on there. First is, yes, that you see in a lot of Near Eastern influenced pantheons, or the, I guess, the cosmology of how did the gods get here. You see this process of primordial beings, a bit of incest, a bit of patricide and matricide, a bit more incest, and this 3 or 4 layers of the kids kill the dad, kill the mum, have sex with the mum, sister, and all this before you get the gods you have today. And the reason for that is purely to provide credibility, which may seem really odd. How can that be credible? But if you create a sort of a family tree of a history of the gods, then it is more believable that happened than a god just appeared. I mean, and that's the same for any story. That is, and I use Atlantis as a similar way. I don't know if I've talked to you about this, but the story of Atlantis that certain grifters think is a real place, because it sounds real, it's got credibility. But if you actually look at the story is written like oh, my next door neighbour's granddad's son went somewhere about a few thousand years ago to see someone who is in a place that you know is probably real to do something. It sounds credible. It is designed to sound credible, but it's actually impossible for you to trace it back to find it because it's not true.
Like Eden. Like Eden.
Yes.
It's the 4 rivers. We know what 2 of them were, but the other ones, a lot of theories on what the other rivers were.
Exactly, but people like that credibility. But they think it's more likely to be real, and you can believe in it. And that's many people who aren't necessarily authentic in their suggestion of what these stories could be. Put things together that shouldn't be put together. You should look at these stories as they are stories. Yes, they may contain some historical truths. They may contain some geographical truths, but that doesn't mean the whole thing is true. Normally, there's a core structure to a story, and then people add things to make it relevant. Yeah, because if they didn't put things, if the Garden of Eden was the story of that was told to people in Canaanite, but you use, let's say, rivers of China, no one would give a monkeys about it because it doesn't make sense. You put things in a story to make it interesting, so people, make sense of it. That is why
you have me at monkeys.
So that's it, and that's a typical storytelling thing. I see it, all the time.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I'm going to try to do something in reverse, and hear me out, and then you correct one of them. So we have Skyfather, Earth Mother. They have their children. At some point, you have a heroic human, but usually a storm god, a god of water or water. So there's one maybe of salt water, maybe of fresh water.
Not always, but it's not regular thing. That's occasional.
Okay, so but definitely a water god, ocean, something to do with water. God of war, a god, maybe a goddess of cycle of life, whether it's an Aphrodite or like a.
Again, it's not a regular thing, but so they're not a consistent Indo European.
Interesting. Okay.
Fixation. It's you see it in people like Greece and Rome because they've stolen it off Greece, but you get gods of fertility, but as such a god of love, no, that's Near Eastern.
Okay, so that's like a Ishtar, Astarte.
Ishtar would be one of those, yes, and I've done a video showing where Aphrodite comes from and trace all the way back to that. Yeah.
So moon and the sun, those seem to be
definitely
obvious.
Well attested. Dawn, well attested.
Magic?
Yeah, magic. No magic.
How about like things like the hunt or fishing, parties?
The ones that persist, that seem to persist, are, which I haven't mentioned, are the fates. So we see like the Norns in Old Norse. They seem to turn up more than not. So they may well be a consistent thing, even pre-agriculture and pre-Indo-European. So they're probably an earlier thought that was going on. The other thing is we see is around death and the ferryman of the dead. So Charon in Greek, to go to Gerdont in Proto-Indo-European. That figure seems very old. Again, possibly in pre-agriculture. So certainly sort of Neolithic. And then you also have, in some cultures, you have this Yemo character who sacrificed to create the world. That Yemo character becomes god of the underworld, the lord of the underworld, lord of the dead.
Like Osiris, which is not Indo-European, but
yeah, exactly. But we see this sort of figure. But what's interesting is we sometimes also see a figure that is the goddess or god of the grave. So they had this persistence that there was a god of the underworld, but it's actually a god who actually pulls you from the living world into the underworld as well.
Maybe the mammoth, as you in your recent video. I'm taking it a step further.
That is a complete, that will really confuse people. Yeah. So, but the
I don't know,
god of the
two giant hooks coming out of the ground.
Yeah, well, yes. So she would feta. It was like the Collio, the cover.
I mean, maybe hunting for giants, which is another, in most mythologies, there's some type of giant or giants out there somewhere, which are godly, but not exactly gods. I mean, there's always monsters too. There's gods with monsters.
Oh yeah, the unknown, and so what we find is many of these localized. So many gods were localized, to answer issues locally, and in the West we tend to think of those as fairies and goblins and all sorts of gnomes or whatever. But in some places they actually become more sacred and misinformed. So certainly the Romans are really guilty at this. So they go somewhere, and as you suggested earlier, they are more willing to accept local gods from places they're in. So let's say a community had a little nymph of the spring somewhere, and a Roman soldier came across it and called it, oh, look, they've got a god of the spring. And then suddenly, we'll do some Romano interpretatio on that and call it the goddess of water for southeast England. And then all of a sudden in the history books or sculptures, you've got this goddess that no one ever worshipped because some poor Roman decided to be, accommodating.
Right.
So we do have to be careful when we look at all these other gods. And
an ancient podcaster loose with his cognates.
Yes, exactly.
Every proclamation is a confession, right?
Exactly.
What about the smith, the poet, the music, medicine, and wine? Those things.
They're more localized. I mean, the blacksmith, I think. I mean, that's obviously going to come after that. So you have to wait till the Bronze Age to really have any knowledge of a blacksmith because you need metal to work with. So that's already like the Indo Europeans are well up and running, and it has been argued that maybe some of our earliest fairy tales. So there's one called The Smith and the Devil, which is around a blacksmith who's given he sells his soul to the devil so he can join any two metals together.
There's Robert Johnson and the guitar, the crossroads.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of thing. Sold a soul to be fantastic. Well, the person in the story connects the devil to a rock, and the devil goes, "What? You've done?" And he says, "Well, I want my soul back, and I'll let you free." While still maintaining his magic, which is all well and good. But if that story's 6,000 years old, it probably can't be about blacksmithing,
right?
And it's still the Smith and the Devil is probably a story about maybe even two devils, one that turns good and one that turns bad or something.
Or maybe just somebody who figured out how to bridle and saddle horses or a plow as whatever the
knowledge,
that kind of technology, so we could call it technology broadly.
Technology does help develop gods. So gods are there to answer humans' questions. We create stories to answer the world around us, and sometimes we need a god to come along to give us a reason for that story to happen.
I would think that some sort of form of granary and seeding and master of livestock, whether it's sheep, goats, cows, horses.
There's pastoral gods. Per person is a Proto-Indo-European name for a god that could have been a pastoral deity, but it isn't consistent. It isn't well attested. So, but without doubt, there were gods of grain and the like. But let's say they're probably more local, and they may well have been, if they were local, more spirits or something else. Like you have a house elves and things like you hear about. And you look after the things locally or whatever. And who knows? Cats were coming along at this time, and cats were considered quite sacred. Perhaps they were considered, holders of spirits, which the Egyptians thought. Which may be related to looking after grain and things. So there's all sorts of understanding or the understanding these people may have had thousands of years ago that we just have lost, because to them it was a day-to-day experience. They didn't write it down because it wasn't special. It was just what they did. It's like religion didn't have a name before someone wanted to start writing things down about religions.
Somewhere out there, someone wrote a PhD on why cats were considered sacred, because I've met a lot of cats. Yeah, and they don't seem all that sacred. Listen, very useful. I'm sure the killing of rats and mice and other vermins were extremely useful to keeping your grain and the non-spreading of disease and stuff like that. But to impute sacredness into them seems to be a reach, no matter how old our thinking men were. But I don't know. What do I know?
I mean, dogs. So cats probably had it because you look into their eyes, they look. You can see to the back of their eyes, can't you? If you look in the right light. And the same with dogs. And dogs were considered a passage to the other world. So that's why there's old traditions where if you died, you let a dog eat you. Well, you don't let other people let the dog eat you. You're dead.
Sure.
But because it's eating you, then at night it will go off to the other world and deposit your body.
But obviously nobody knows, or maybe somebody does, but I don't. I mean, wouldn't that go back to times when wolves probably got to you before you had time to bury them, unless you wanted to deal with like 6 packs of wolves attacking you while you're trying to bury someone, and so you moved on?
Well, it may be that to explain the behaviour of why ravens and wolves ate dead people, is that, they must be taking them to the other world, not because they're hungry. Yeah, and so you create reasons for what you're seeing in the world. That is religion. Religion is just people who don't understand science and nature.
So maybe they started as sort of children's stories to make children feel not so bad that, Uncle Thorasimus was being eaten by a bunch of turkey vultures, buzzards, don't feel bad. He's being taken to the underworld.
Children ask the best questions. Yeah.
I often tell my guests, remember, you're talking to an idiot. So I'm a middle-aged child in this regard. Okay, so I think we've got a pretty good idea as to sort of the archetypes of the pantheon of Indo European and Proto Indo European, and have learned some things that we, meaning me, the strong person, would have assumed have been. I think we can take this turn on our journey to visit upon the Odyssey, and what your thoughts of what the work itself means versus the movie. I assume you've seen the movie, or at least I've heard a million.
No, I've heard of the movie, but I haven't seen it. No,
not me either. So
I will watch it, but so my views on these will explain how I look at stories differently to a classicist, so I'll start with the Iliad because that's the easy one. Sure. So lots of people, if you ask them what the Iliad's about, they say, it's about the Trojan War, it's about Achilles and his relationship, or it's about 2 marriages, Helen of Troy to Paris, but if you're a mythologist, it's none of those things. The story of the Iliad is about Zeus wanting to kill as many people as possible.
Nice.
Okay, and the reason we know that is because storytelling, even to a couple of 100 years ago, always started with a synopsis of what the story is. Listen to Shakespeare. He'll tell you before you watch Romeo and Juliet, 2 star-crossed lovers are going to kill each other or to both die. And then you watch the play. Yeah, and people, that was acceptable. The very second line of the Iliad, I think it's third line of the Iliad, Zeus wants to kill lots of people, the world's too busy, which is a pretty standard motif in some epics. We see it in the Enuma Elish, we see it in other stories, this, if the world's too busy, too noisy, let's kill a few people. That's what God wanted to do. What's the best way to kill it? Yeah. And that's been done. But best way to kill a few people, if you're Zeus and there's a Trojan War on, use the Trojan War as the thing. So that's how I look at it. So if I look at the Odyssey with my same mythological spectacles, because the Odyssey isn't a story, well, it is a story about Odysseus traveling, but it's a story of Odysseus' story about him traveling, because he's already done the traveling. With no spoilers. When he's asked, he's got a year. He's like 9 years in, I think, into his journey, and he's just trying to get help. And they say, "Well, you tell us a good story. We'll give you help."
He's on the island of Calypso when he starts narrating his own memories.
Exactly. So in effect, but actually, what's really there? So there's 2 aspects to this. There's the actual Odyssey is really about one's own journey through life, and you're going to have challenges, get over them, be good with your relationships and honest and all these sort of things. That's what it's about. It's not. It doesn't matter who is what color and what culture and wearing what armor. It doesn't really matter. It's just a question of challenges. But the actual story itself, there's two versions of it, and these stories are really common in America to Indigenous Americans, which is that there's a story where someone goes off, like it's in the real world, goes off and then ends up in a strange world full of things that aren't usual and has all these challenges and has to find his way back to the real world. It's this sort of, they call it the wanderer. And it's really common, certainly on the west coast of America. And there's occasional instances of it, I believe, in parts of Southeast Asia and into Greece. And it was Yuri Bereskin who said that he believes those trails of the story in Eurasia are probably leftovers and have now been replaced by other stories that were taken by people into the Americas. So he believes it's a sort of a pre-15,000 year ago story, because that's when the Bering Strait shut off as a land bridge, that was told in Eurasia, went to the Americas, but then stopped being told in Eurasia due to other things happening. This is, we were no longer hunter gatherers and wandering around aimlessly, not finding things. So the story had less purpose.
And I imagine that's why you take you take issue with things being Jungian or Campbellian as being the cause, that somewhere in our brain things are pre-wired to work a certain way, as opposed to, no, somebody told these stories a long, long time ago and it became trope and it became archetypes. It's not because now resonated with us, clearly the storytelling. I mean, Tolkien, it's the same thing. It starts with, you see Bilbo writing his book, and it's almost the same thing. The age of heroes leading into
fantasy, heroes journey. Absolutely,
the elves and the wizards are the gods, and now it's just left to men. It's. I mean, I guess that's why Tolkien has been so successful, because it's the same formula, but it's not because we have these preset ideas in our head. It's because somebody told really good stories, and it worked whenever they went from town to town, village to village, city to city, and eventually country to country and continent to continent.
We're not the first people to make up these stories. They have been told for tens of thousands of years. All we've done is just change the details of the story to make them relevant. And if it stops being relevant, the story stops being told where we are, but it may continue elsewhere. And that is exactly why we have things like the folklore database that shows the dispersal of stories, because you can see which stories people like and which stories they're not particularly fond. Well, you can't see what they're not fond of because they're not there. You could just assume they're not fond of them. I mean, a lack of evidence doesn't mean they didn't like them. They have not been told them.
But I think there's definitely human elements in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, and that is pride, hubris. And I can't help, but I keep seeing the violation of hospitality. I mean, someone stole someone's wife. The wife wanted to go, so maybe. And then, you go into Polyphemus's cave and help yourself to the food and all that. And, and the suitors, took over Ithaca.
Those are standard motifs. He says just a collection of various stories linked together, weaved with some historical truths, some geological truths, so people at the time thought it relevant and could think, wow, this could have been real. That's it. It's just good storytelling, and it is a good story. Yeah.
Well, this is probably really good practice for your live stream at 3, because I imagine you're going to be getting a lot of questions about the Odyssey this afternoon.
I don't know. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I mean, this is just an educated guess being on time.
I would disappoint people.
It's also a cheap plug that you've got a live stream now. Is it for anyone, or is it for only your patrons?
No, it's for anyone. Yes, in 50 minutes I will be online, possibly talking to myself, and if people turn up, about I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I did write some notes. My folklore database has been updated. I'm going to talk about mammoths a bit, and talk about what's going on with my book, and answer questions, which is what I usually do. I get
I don't know when you have time to write a book, but okay.
I'm struggling, but I'm getting there.
Is your, I mean, you maybe should write a book on like semi-ludicrous but like semi-intelligent questions you get from people like me. And
you ask good questions, Jeff. It's I say there's no such thing as a bad question. You get rude questions, not from you, but I do get many rude questions on YouTube. But
I'm sure you do.
But yeah, no, all questions are good because people don't. If I explain something and they ask a question, it's probably because I haven't explained it properly. So I'm happy to try and expand that, and I learn from that to be able to teach better, and yeah, that's good. There's nothing wrong with questions.
There's also two other likely reasons. I mean, and yours might be correct as one of them, and maybe the most charitable. But there's a lot of people who follow topics deeply, whatever the topic is, that they can't communicate any other way for various reasons. So they don't mean to be rude. That's just the way they communicate. There's others that hold to some fixed set of beliefs that are implacable, that are there to try to tell you why you're wrong, and why it was all X God's plan or the devil's plan, or you're engaged in demonology and you're hearkening in the end of the world, which I don't know. No, I'm not going to say what I was about to say.
No, it's hard. It's hard. You must know it's hard on YouTube to create a YouTube title and thumbnail that people want to click on, and then people criticize you for having a clickable thumbnail and title. And it's then no one watches the video. What do you? It's hard. So you need thick skin.
There's a reason why the New York Times has the big thing above the fold. I mean, this is. I mean, exactly. This is, after all, a business or an aspirational business anyway. So, all right. So back to the Odyssey and your thoughts on it, because because there are certainly themes like the Cyclops, and then there's a different set of giants, and then there's witches and sirens,
Calypso and sirens, yes, and there's all different struggles in life, from monsters, and as you say, you talk about hospitality, but challenges in love, and then his wife's at home with 1,000 suitors, and which he doesn't know about, but she's been faithful, and he comes back and he takes part in it's the bow and arrow competition at the archery, where he has to string a bow, which
Robin Hood.
Exactly the same in the Mahabharata. As I say at the start, these things are similar, exactly the same. That there are aspects to life at the time that people considered good things, and perhaps stringing a bow and shooting an arrow properly was considered a sign of
greatness,
worthy of marrying the woman of your dreams.
Sure.
So anyone out there who's single, wants to get married to a woman of your dreams, learn to string a bow.
Right. That was like the Bronze Age equivalent of 1977. If you could dance like John Travolta on the disco, then
I like that analogy. Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Christopher Nolan should have, because he tried to make it more contemporary, should have had a disco dance at the end of the film. I haven't seen it yet, but if there's not a disco dance at the end of the film to win his wife back, I will be disappointed.
So we'll just wait for my new emails on is the Old Testament really Saturday Night Live, or Saturday Night Live really the Odyssey? It's
Greece. It's Greece.
Paradise Eve, or I'm sorry, not Saturday Night Live.
Yes, I like that idea. I haven't really looked at that, but yes.
That would actually be a successful video. It's a little dated. Maybe go with Dirty Dancing. That's also a little dated. I don't know.
Well, I like that. Did Homer write Saturday Night Fever? Is a good title.
Yeah, but we've got witches. And also how your men, your understudies, they're really fungible. They're sort of like non-player characters in videos games, except they're characters. And they're important, but they're sort of if they all die, they all die. This is
exactly. If they all turn to pigs, they'll turn to pigs. Exactly, it doesn't matter.
That's yes. Right, and and it's interesting. I mean, listen, I don't know if there's any relationship or not, but Jesus put the demons into pigs, legion, which would be strange because there shouldn't be a lot of swine herds where Jesus was, since most of the people were kosher.
Exactly, yeah.
And keeping 100 pigs around probably wasn't very popular nearby.
Perhaps the Greeks who wrote the Odyssey were the same Greeks that wrote the New Testament, perhaps, Jeff, maybe.
There we go. Now you're in my world. There you go. I got John. This is fantastic.
Because there is, allegedly some Homeric type writings within the Gospels.
Oh,
the Greek written Gospels by Greek scholars who learned by reading things like Homer.
I was pleased as punch to learn that not only are there scholars that agree with that, but they also see it also in the New Testament or parts of the New Testament, which only makes sense because, I mean, like you said, the type of literature, the type of poetry, those forms sort of repeat, even though I learned in excruciating detail that Hebrew poetry is different than other poetry, but still the form of storytelling, it's different. It's more with like the number and how you build on themes, like you say it once, then you say it twice, then you say it 3 times, and you keep adding on.
Different people have different ways of remembering, but it's the meter.
Exactly. It's not the rhyme, it's the meter. Exactly right.
That and an interesting story, and your story is likely to be remembered.
Yeah, and that's how people remember it.
It will still change though if the details are irrelevant.
Yeah, and that's how people could tell it in, Old Hebrew and or Aramaic, and somebody later on could or some bodies could write it in Greek, and then in Latin and
English.
English, of course, and I guess Coptic was Egyptian Greek.
I thought that was. There must be Coptic texts of the New Testament. I would have thought there is in Ethiopia, isn't there?
Yeah, well, that's gay as according to J.J. Johnson from Southern Demonology. So, listen, I don't know. I can't read any of these languages. I can't read modern Greek. I can't read modern Hebrew. I can't read, modern Ethiopian. I cannot attest to those. We've used that word quite a bit. So, I guess from your hearing of the reviews of the Odyssey, and yes, we understand that Nolan changed a lot of things to sort of tell his version of the story, but it seems like the classicists and the historians are not outraged about it. They're like, it's fine. This is a story that's meant to change with time, and he changed it with time, and this is just his vision. What are you getting all upset about? And of course, then there's some people who are just upset that, Helen of Troy was, African American, or at least sub-Saharan African, as opposed. I'm sure they would have been so totally less, if she was like, Somalian, North African, or from Carthage, and that Ethan Page, Elliot Page.
He wasn't making though. The Odyssey is not historically accurate, and he isn't making any historical accurate representation of that. It's entertainment. It's entertainment. That's right. But although, from what I understand, I would expect big things from the Odyssey. Yeah, and Nolan should be able to deliver big things. But my understanding on that measure is that it's more of a rather than a yay. Yeah,
and the Greek world was not homogeneous either. I mean, the Greeks were not homogeneous. I mean, there was plenty of trade, but, well before there was
absolutely to India, to Near East, absolutely.
Yeah, and Egypt, and apparently they got tin from Afghanistan and Britain.
Exactly. So yeah, and I'll say those sort of things don't bother me. If it's meant to be a historically accurate documentary, I might have issues with things, but it is meant to be that. It's just entertainment, so enjoy it.
And my understanding also is that Helen, the actress who plays Helen, actually also plays Clytemnestra, and Zendaya also plays Cassandra. And so it just might be on purpose to give you some different skin tones in there to pay attention to notice the rather minor characters because of the casting, and they're identical and different.
And that happens, doesn't it? Because Game of Thrones had that problem where someone complained that there wasn't enough sort of different races in some of it. And like George R. R. Martin's like, we have to get extras from the remote town we're in. We have to pick whoever's in this remote town. We can't ship over 3,000 people in an army. You've got to.
Well, it was also sort of the point. I mean, the point is that Westeros was not homogeneous. I mean, the people in Dorne were sort of they were like sort of the
Yeah.
forgotten kingdom because they were in the south, whether they were Spaniards or Arabs or whatever, or what they were supposed to be, something. But they were the people from the southern islands. But like when the Unsullied and Melisandre came in with what was it, Khaleesi, I forgot what her, Daenerys, when she's marching her armies through town and she's supposed to be a savior, people look in the army and go, what are those? We don't have people like that here. So it was like, right there, she had this unanticipated challenge of she's basically otherizing, the army of the savior, where the Targaryens already have a semi-bad reputation. She's got 3 monstrous dragons with her, out of recent, forgotten memory. And there's monsters coming from the north, and she's bringing others in, including, the rampaging Dothraki and the, castrated Unsullied. It's all weird. It's all supposed to be uncomfortable. And I think that was part of the point to it. Now in House of Dragon, they took an entirely different approach, and, we don't need to get into a sidetrack about the world of George R. R. Martin. Plus you're on the clock. But I too am not someone who generally gets concerned about changing the races of things like orcs and elves and dwarves and gods and monsters, because it's not particularly important. Making Wonder Man, Simon Williams, a techno-white scientist who hates Tony Stark, to making Wonder Man an African-American young actor doesn't make a particular difference to me in the storytelling.
Just hearing you say, no one cares about the sex of an orc. Exactly. I mean, surely people can listen to that and realise that is absolutely true. Why would you spend your time arguing over something that's fantasy?
Yeah. Now, what I don't know is, not seeing the movie, I don't know how the other characters in the underworld are portrayed. I think if you cast Elliot Page because you're supposed to be weathered down to your bones and whatever, I think Elliot Page actually would be very interesting. That Achilles is sort of a shell of himself, physically and mentally, would be an interesting choice. But I have no idea if that's part of it or not.
No, I don't know. So I'll watch it, and we'll one day give some feedback, but it'll probably be 1 or 2 words, because I don't think it deserves more than that.
Right. Yeah. I think just in this time, people are, trying to give it more import than it does.
Well, they're trying to make money from it, aren't they? Talk about something, subjective and have a view on it. It annoys me, but I've got better things to do. Right.
I mean, I think studying the actual Odyssey is right there in your wheelhouse. Studying any depiction of the Odyssey on TV or movies probably is.
And asking many of those people, how many of them have actually read it? Or read more than one version, which you should do if you're a classicist.
I'm pretty sure that a whole bunch of them that I've seen clips of have not read it, and probably haven't read anything that's not by Andrew Tate or J.D. Vance. So
there we go.
Yeah. All right. With that, I think that I've taken you as far as I should, and you have something to prepare for. So, by all means, thank you once again for your time and putting up with me. To someone who's hopefully out there who has said before, Bullet Club is fine and too sweet. I hope you're here, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you start following my stuff. If not, I hope you do go on one of Jon's trips and adventures, and you guys become best friends. But Jon, tell everyone about where they can find you and what you're doing in your retirement, which is hardly a retirement.
You can find me on Crecganford, which is down there, or you can find me on the Folklore database. They're my 2 big things. I have a TV documentary series out called Beyond Myth. I think that's on Amazon. Not overly sure. Have a book out. I don't know that. I'm too busy. I didn't realise it was out until I Googled myself. I was trying to update my social media and saw I was on IMDb.
Are you too old to develop an ego?
I can't be too busy doing wonderful stuff. And I hopefully I have a book out about our oldest myths and stories before Christmas. So there you go. That's me at the moment in my retirement.
I can't wait. Well, when the book comes out, hopefully you'll come back on and promote it and talk about it. I also want you to talk to the people who do myths and legends. They just came out with a book about King Arthur, and maybe see how that compare and contrast. But I'm not sure if that's a good use of your time
Oh, King Arthur. Yes, I do like talking about King Arthur. He's a very interesting character. Like the I wouldn't say the real one, but our earliest recorded attestations of him. Very interesting.
Yeah, King Arthur is, I mean, a lot of retelling of a lot of other stories. Some people say it's like a warrior retelling of the Jesus story, but if all stories are, sort of go back to something.
I could tell you, well,
go ahead.
Maybe this, if I'm still doing this in 2 years' time, I will tell you where the Jesus story came from.
Okay.
That will be my next book.
Well, deal. Now I have to stick around for 2 years.
That's an exclusive there. Yes, because very interesting.
Folks, what else am I going to do with my time? I already watch too much wrestling, and most of the things that people tell me to watch on TV or movies, I either find them to be very or hate them. So I have to keep doing podcasts to keep myself busy and keep my mind working. All right. Well, you've heard where you can follow Jon. You can support his work. You can become a Patreon. He's creating the folklore database which covers myths and folklores from all over the world in all time spans, and you can see where, if you want to study dragons, for instance, you can see where there's congregations of dragon stories and where there's 3 and where there's 3,300, and and I'm making the numbers up, of course, and how they're spread out over the world, and so if you want to study dragons, oh Lord, you can study dragons, or oh Lords, you can study dragons, whichever Elohim or pantheon you subscribe to, or whichever God, there are no other gods before him in your world. So it's fine. They're myths and folklore. You don't have to. You don't have to sacrifice a cow or Burger King to them unless you want to. If you want to, I'd recommend doing Burger King, because even if it's your own cow, it's probably not going to be looked on
before you sacrifice a living.
Yeah. So support you, and listen, support your local business. Get the burgers from your local butcher or pub first. They need the business more. Send the Burger King to me, because I like food. Anyway, if you want to find me, you can find me right here on the Sports Jedi Media Network. On YouTube, it is the Sports Jedi Media Network. Everywhere else, it's the Sports Jedi Network. I know it's a little confusing. Hopefully a temporary situation. I'm also on the Wrestling Soup Network. You can find my reviews of LFG with the legendary Lufisto. On Monday nights at 6:05, usually you can find me and Mr. Thomas, my best friend. Jon, sorry, you're not my best friend. You're in the top 10. Mr. Thomas is my best friend. Also bald with a beard, former professional wrestler. Well, maybe he's weighing whether he's a former professional wrestler or not, but formerly of MLW Wrestling. We review MLW on the MLW Files right here. Tuesday nights, I review with our producer in the back, Kevin, NXT. I think it's called the Padawan Awakens, because the Sports Jedi, then the NXT is developmental. And I do some other stuff too. So also, of course, Garden of Thought. You can subscribe on all audio platforms. Jon, you don't do audio. You don't reduce yours to a podcast.
I do. I think you can find me on Spotify occasionally, but I forget to upload my content. So there are a few episodes, but not many.
You are in need of an intern, my friend.
Just need time is what I need, Jeff.
Or a grandchild or something.
I've got children, but they're a drain on resources. They're not. They give me happiness in return for losing all my money and hair.
Well, I mean, you're supposed to spend money on grandchildren, but the kids tend to be very tech savvy and probably, and probably for a double scoop of ice cream, they can be bought very easily. In any event, my ideas aren't always the best ideas, just occasionally.
Okay. So yeah. I'll tell my children to hurry up and make more grandchildren.
Yes. Well, I mean, that is something that grandparents do tell their grandchildren and children to do. And now, my parents are not telling me to have any more children, which is extremely wise advice. In any event, thank you all for listening. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was fun and educational, which is sort of always the goal of the show. Not always realized, but usually so. Tell your friends, please like and subscribe to both my shows and to the network writ large. And Jon, I can't thank you enough for your time. Good luck on the live stream. I probably won't be with you this afternoon, but I do try to pop in when I can.
Okay, thank you.